Here's why I regret buying my Airbnb and why you might regret buying an Airbnb as well. Jeremy Knight, the Night Group, your favorite Austin realtor. A lot of people reach out to me about buying Airbnbs, and I actually just sold my Airbnb that I bought 2 years ago. And I'm gonna go through why it was not what it's cracked up to be and why you buying Airbnb might not enjoy it just like I didn't. So if you've owned an Airbnb or buying Airbnbs, drop a comment below. I want to hear from you. What's your success rate? What are you doing well? What are you not doing well? What's good? What's bad? Drop a comment below. Here we go. So a little over 2 years ago, I purchased an Airbnb in Sal Padre. It was the thing to do. Now, my investment strategy is always different from other people's investment strategies. In fact, we bought this as a second home and it was a great property. But I wish I know now a lot of the things I didn't know then. First of all, we bought this as a second home. We like to go into Sal Padre. It's on the coast. So it's about a 5 to 6 hour drive for us. Now, we bought this in the middle of the pandemic for a very good price. This property needed some updates to it, so we had planned that in. But we bought this as a second home. We did a second home mortgage. We're going to talk about how maybe you should be buying as an investment mortgage instead of second home mortgage in this as well. But our plan for this was to go down there and offset the costs by Airbnb this property. Now, we talked to other people that had Airbnbs in Sal Padre and we went through what they were renting for, what they were doing, and we kind of set a budget from there based on, okay, we're going to be down there 6 to 8 times a year for about a week each. Then the pandemic ended. Well, not really ended, but kids went back to school. So while we were down there and school was out and we were literally working from Sal Padre, my son was going to school from Sal Padre. It was fantastic. And all the following things started happening and it made this Airbnb that we absolutely loved not as enjoyable. So when you buy an Airbnb, there's a lot of actual upfront costs that you don't think of. In our scenario with this Airbnb, we had to go through and repaint this thing and it took a few days to repaint the whole property. That cost, $5,000 to $6,000. We had to fix some things that needed to be fixed. And then on top of that, we had to buy all new furniture. So our upfront fee after purchasing this property, we spent about another $12,000 getting this property ready to go. There's a lot of other things you got to keep in mind when you're buying an Airbnb. You have to know the taxes, like how much money you have to actually take for taxes. You have to know what the cleaning fees. So as we started renting this out, our initial cleaning fees were really high, and so people weren't renting our place. You constantly have to adjust the prices and pay attention to it. And on top of that, you need to get a property manager if you're not there. So for us, it became not necessarily a money maker at that point because we anticipated making X amount of money and we anticipated, okay, take off for this amount. And at the end of the day, it just started not making sense anymore because number one, you got to get a property manager, right? So property managers are typically going to take about 25% of the rental fee. So if you're thinking, okay, I'm going to make 40 grand a year on this as a rental, but then you take 25% off because you have a management, well, that's going to eat into the cost. So now you actually have to rent it for a little more. So some things with the management company you actually have to be very diligent with is, are they actually going through Airbnb, adjusting the price appropriately? Are they marketing the property? Are they actually going out and checking the property? Are they actually cleaning the property? Are they verifying when they're cleaning? So if you don't get a very good management company, it's really, really tough. So we had one that was like 17% to start, and this thing did not rent at all. So then we moved to another company that was 25% and it rented more. But then after a while, they started actually renting lower and lower and lower and lower. So what we thought during the week was going to be, let's just say for fun numbers, $150 during the middle of the week was actually like $75 during the middle of the week. And then people were like breaking things in the property. It just wasn't fun. And if they don't have a manager that goes in there, it's going to keep costing you because you're going to have to keep fixing things. When you're interviewing your management company, you really have to make sure that they are going to market the property and not just lower the price as a marketing tool to bump it up on Airbnb. Because once you keep dropping that price down, you start getting issues in the property. When we bought our property, we had just dropped like 10 to 15 grand on this property. And then all of a sudden the HVAC went out. Luckily, we had a home warranty on the property, so A lot of that got covered. So we had a brand new HVAC going. That would have cost me an additional $8,000. Shortly after that, the washer dryer broke. We had to go through like rounds and rounds and rounds and rounds of people coming in to try to fix this washer and dryer. And finally, they had to replace it. They did not like us for that. So definitely get a good home warranty if you're buying an Airbnb. Everything that could go out on this property went out. So it was starting to eat up a lot of time having to coordinate to get somebody there because it's not an Airbnb that was close by. If you go get like a yearly lease rental, a lot of the times you don't have as many issues and it's more cost effective realistically. You might make a little bit less, but at the end of the day, it's a lot less time spent getting all those things fixed. So what would happen is when we'd go down to visit our Airbnb, out of 7 days, 3 days I'd spend finding things that I'd have to fix in this Airbnb because our management company didn't have a really good like handyman. And on top of that, if you don't factor in those costs to have a good handyman, you become the handyman. And on top of that, it's going to be more expensive, right? If stuff's constantly getting broke because they're renting it for lower than you'd like to, and you need to have to offset those costs, then it just doesn't become worth it. Every time I'd go down, I'd start to not enjoy our property that we purchased because it was constantly need to be fixed. Now, one other thing to think about too when you're doing Airbnb is there are restrictions for different cities. Like here in Austin, I have a lot of clients reach out to me who want to buy Airbnbs in Austin. There's a lot of rules around buying an Airbnb and actually getting an Airbnb license. So be aware of what those are in your city. In Austin, it's very tough. There's only 3 ways to get an Airbnb license here in the Austin area. South Padre is more of a destination, so it's a lot easier for us, but still we had to go through all the hoops and that became a problem. So if you buy an Airbnb, just know that like it's not going to start renting right away. So you actually have to really plan for not having rentals. And then you got to plan for the off seasons when it's not. So for us do we get a winter Texan in there? So we do like a 2-month rental on it. Well, we got a winter Texan in there. I think they paid us like $2,000 a month, which barely made like sense. Like it was like right on like not making money. And we couldn't go down there then that 2 months. Like, well, we wanted to go visit our Airbnb and it just became tough for that. Well, if you have an HOA, so you're gonna have an HOA monthly service fee, right? So ours is about $400. And then what'll happen with an HOA, you just have to deal with neighbors. If you're buying an Airbnb, you may have the situation we had. We had a downstairs neighbor. Our HOA covenant said that you could only have 6 heads per unit. Well, anytime there were 7 or 8 people, the downstairs neighbor, if they were in town, they would call the HOA manager and we'd have to kick people out because there was more people than what we actually said in the Airbnb notes, right? So if you said only 6 people can show up and they bring 8, well, that's always going to be a problem. But our downstairs neighbor would always complain about it. In fact, she just sold hers right after we sold our property or right before we sold our property. So I guess we should have held on either way. But then you got to deal with special assessments. Our 2 units, mine had 2 4-unit complexes with a pool. Well, we had a special assessment that ended up running like $5,000 to $7,000 per unit to repaint and fix things and all the maintenance. So not only do we have maintenance costs for our own unit, we had maintenance costs for the whole complex, and that became just not fun because now you're arguing with the HOA on something that's more of a second home. It's not really your home. And you're arguing with the HOA, you're arguing with everybody, and it wasn't fun. Like it just was not fun to have to keep arguing with these things and then come out of pocket. The one thing to really think about when you're buying an Airbnb though, is do you buy it as a second home, which ends up being a cheaper interest rate or a less expensive interest rate, or do you buy it just as an investment property? I recommend you do your due diligence and go through, figure out which loan type makes sense. If you buy it as an investment, you actually have more things you can deduct on the property. So we bought ours as a second home, not really knowing that we should probably just buy as an investment. Plus the interest rate was a little bit higher on an investment and there was less we could actually deduct at the end of the year. So number one, we're spending more on the home, less we can deduct on it. So having to drive down there, do all this extra time, and it just became not worth it. So for you, think about how much time. Now we have other investment properties that are yearly leased and the time spent is just so much easier on those. Now, I also hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to make all of this money a month, and then it doesn't rent. So those are things to think about as well. And then here's the other thing. As far as maintenance goes, Airbnb kind of sucks. Just Airbnb itself just kind of is not fun because we would have issues with renters that would either break things or things would happen in the unit. And we go to Airbnb to get these items fixed. Like we had window blinds that were broken by a renter. Nope, they didn't fix it. They wouldn't give us the money for it. Came out of pocket for us. So you do have to know that Airbnb isn't going to take care of you as a host. And then if you get a bad review, then less people show up. And then you have to fight with Airbnb even more. And then you always have to fight to keep your super status. So there's just so many things with Airbnb that just aren't helpful. And sometimes their staff wasn't the most helpful in my experience. So just know that your experience with Airbnb might not be the best. So at the end of the day, I really enjoyed our unit. I really enjoyed our Airbnb. It did make financial sense for us because we went into it knowing we just wanted to break even because we would rent the property. That becomes something else that becomes a problem too. If you rent the property during those times where it's going to rent the most, now you can't actually go use your property because you're actually losing money on it. So it becomes not as fun, especially if you're buying as a second home. Now, other people that are just buying Airbnbs as Airbnbs, that's not something you have to worry about. They will just be times where you just can't go down and hang out in your property because it's being rented. At the end of the day, it was a great investment for us. After spending 2 years, we realized that we just weren't going to be going down to Sao Padre as much. And with all the headache and dealing with Airbnb, dealing with tenants, dealing with management companies that weren't fulfilling their duties, dealing with HOAs that weren't fulfilling their duties, it was just time for us to move on. So there you go. Did you buy an Airbnb? Did you find any of this information I gave helpful? Drop a comment below. Make sure you subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.